Let's talk about micro-loading. So I had a good question come through from one of our customers of several of our products. Shout out to Carmen. And her question was, what were my thoughts about micro-loading? So if you have no idea what that is, that's what we're gonna talk about. We'll talk about who it's for, who it's not for, and kind of what it means for your results. So micro-loading is exactly what the word says, micro-loads. So it's increasing your weight, also known as your intensity, increasing the weight and the intensity in these small loads, these small improvements. And while that makes sense, it would make sense that you would want to make these small micro improvements, it's really more of a liability. So traditionally, kettlebells have around a 8 kilogram jump. So when they came here to the US around turn of the millennia, late 1990s, going into 2000, kettlebells are from Russia, so they're weighed in poods. Half pood, 1 pood. So a half pood is 8 kilograms, or somewhere around 18 pounds. 1 pood would be 16 kilograms, about 35 pounds. And so those were your options. 8 kilogram jumps. So traditionally, when kettlebells came here to the US, we had 8 kilos, 16 kilos, 24, 32, 40. So we didn't have the luxury of these little, 1 and 2 pound jumps. And so nowadays they're, over time, over the last, 20 years, kettlebell producers have kind of filled in those gaps. But I think that's more of a detriment because it does a couple of things. It allows us to train with weights that we're not ready for. When you've got these big kilogram jumps, it kind of, for lack of better words, forces you to get your volume in. Again, and nowadays with the evolution and the growth in the kettlebell world, you have all of these in-between sizes, these little, 2 kilogram jumps. They even make kettlebells now where you can screw in like 1 pound weights. I've seen people tape 1 pound, half pound weights to their kettlebells. But it allows you to just make improvements faster than you, and when I say improvements, I'm talking about increasing the weight, increasing the intensity, faster than you should. And so now you'll find that sometimes, and that puts us in a position to where we need to get all these kettlebells. And I'm not opposed to having a vast kettlebell collection, because depending on your goals, you may need that. But if we're talking about minimalism here, and if we're talking about minimum effective dose, and this is actually what made kettlebells like sexy when they came to the US here in the turn of the millennia, is this was the actual like marketing angle, was you only needed this one piece of equipment. You only needed this one piece of equipment, this handheld gym, as they would say, and it would replace pretty much every piece of a gym equipment you'd ever need. And that's true. So for a gentleman, all you really need is like a 24 kilo, or maybe even a 16 kilo. I believe it was Brett Jones, Master Strong First instructor, who said, lock me in a room with a 16 kilogram and I'll come out stronger. But now we have all these kettlebell sizes. And so what I recommend is sticking with the classic kettlebell sizes. Well, what are classic kettlebell sizes? Well, if we stick with the true classic kettlebell sizes, then we're talking 8 kilo jumps. But that might not be conducive for beginners and even advanced athletes, and particularly like if we have ladies that are training, you may need smaller increments. In the context of when I say I would stick with the classic kettlebell sizes, I recommend 4 kilogram jumps. So for men, we're talking 16 kilos, 20 maybe, 24, 28, 32. For ladies, 8 kilos, 10 kilos, 12, 16 kilos. I would avoid the 14 kilo. And the reason for this is, as I mentioned earlier, when you make these bigger jumps, 16 to 24 kilogram, or 24 to 32 kilogram, that's a 25% increase in intensity. And so what does this do? What's the benefit here? Well, number one, what this does is this actually allows you to train for longevity. And that's really the name of the game here, is we want our strength training to serve us so that we can do other things in life, play with our kids, go golf, fish, jiu-jitsu, like whatever that is that you enjoy doing, we want our strength training to serve us. And so that means being able to train for the long haul. And so whenever we train with kettlebells and we follow these bigger jumps, 16 kilos to 24 kilos or 16 kilos to 20 kilos, it allows us to train for longevity. How does it do that? Well, you got to get your volume in. And so to get your volume in, well, what does that mean? Well, now you have more opportunity for skill practice. And from my perspective, training jiu-jitsu for over 20 years and strength training with kettlebells for over 15 years, technique is king. Technique conquers all. And so you got to build your skill. So in the Strong First community, we talk about strength as a skill set, and that skill set is something that should be practiced on a regular basis. So when you make these bigger jumps, you put skill before intensity, and it allows you to build what I call building your 80% strength. What does that mean? Let's say we're talking about the kettlebell press. Instead of trying to train for like 1 rep max, most people don't really need to train for a 1 rep max, but if you've got a particular goal, if you're trying to press half your body weight, then yeah, that becomes a priority. But general fitness, we're talking here, we don't want to seek to increase our overall 1 rep max. We would rather increase our, let's say, 5 rep max. If we can take our 5 rep max to an 8 rep max or more, by default, that will increase your overall rep maximum, like your absolute strength, without having to train for a 1 rep max. If we can take that, what was a 5 rep max, and let's say it was 16 kilos, and at the end of a training cycle, we can take that to a 20 kilo 5 rep max, then as a default, overall, your 1 rep absolute strength has increased without having to train for an absolute 1 rep maximum. And this is what we call training and building your 80% strength. So when you train with those bigger kettlebell sizes, it puts you in a position to grow and build your volume, allows more opportunities for skill training, because it's volume that builds your strength, not intensity. Intensity will help peak your strength, but you don't stay at that peak, right? Anytime we hit any kind of peak, let's say 1 rep max, the next step after that is you either voluntarily step off that peak or you're gonna fall off. So it's volume that builds your strength. It's volume that maintains your strength after the peak. So if you're a beginner, if you're training for general fitness, I don't recommend micro loading, because it's gonna allow you to train for weights that you're not ready for. And what this is I'm gonna make another video on this, or a separate video on this. I'll tag it up here in the corner when it's ready, about built-in safety mechanisms. So when you train with these bigger jumps, this is a built-in safety mechanism to keep you from using loads that you're just not ready for yet. So to take that 24 to 32 kilo progression over time, 25% increase, the only way to get there really is to build your volume versus kind of sneaking up on it by adding these little change plates, 1 pound, 2 pound jumps. It's best to build your volume, because it's the volume that builds your strength. It's the volume that maintains your strength. So if you focus on building volume with medium loads, what are medium loads? Weights around 80%. This is why we want to focus on building our 80% strength, 75 to 80% strength. When we focus on that, let's say we take some time off. Let's say we go on vacation for a week. You're not going to lose progress, because when you train at that 80% and you build that volume, strength becomes sticky, and you're not going to lose that progress. So when you come back, you might very well, and it's not uncommon, you might very well be stronger than when you went on vacation. So when would training with micro loads, when would that be appropriate? Like, who would that be for? Well, based on my experience of barbell deadlifting, I think micro loading makes more sense if you're training with barbells, particularly say deadlifting. You want the luxury of having those smaller loads, those smaller jumps. let's use the example of going, 16 kilos or 24 kilos to 32 kilos, a 25% increase. With a barbell, particularly, like say training for the deadlift, we don't want to be making 25% jumps. And even if we're going to try to go for a rep max test or a 1 rep max test, we can't keep making 25% increases and improvements over time. You need to start making these smaller increases, micro loads. So with the barbell, yes, you would want to load, 5 to 10 pounds at a time. For ladies, maybe 20 pounds at a time for men, which is still somewhere around about a 4 kilo increase. But that's going to be probably the best time to leverage micro loading is when you're training with barbells. But if you're training with kettlebells for general fitness, I don't recommend micro loading. Now, with that said, again, with the popularity of kettlebells, you have these adjustable kettlebells. I'm not against adjustable kettlebells because I actually just picked me up a pair of adjustable kettlebells for whenever I travel. So that way I don't have to take, multiple bell sizes with me depending on the training protocol that I'm on. But even with a adjustable kettlebell, I will adhere to those 4 and 8 kilogram jumps. So the adjustable kettlebell that I got ranges from, I believe, 12 kilos to 32 kilos. So depending on the protocol that I'm on, I try to keep those jumps 4 to 8 kilos increments. And this is also particular to training the ballistics. Now, if you're training the grinds, you're going to need smaller jumps. I would say 4 kilos for ladies, 2 kilo increases. But if you're going to be training ballistics, let's say we're training snatches, we're training swings, we're training jerks. Yeah, you want those big jumps. And this is actually proven. I believe it was one of the fathers of the variable overload method, the Soviet weightlifting model, Professor Arkady Vodobiev. He did research that concluded that sharper increases in load yield greater outcomes. In fact, not just greater outcomes, a 61% increase in improvements in their trainees. And the Soviets tracked every single piece of data back in the day. And so a 61% increase improvement, and they were making these sharper changes in load. So now keep in mind, the weightlifting team, they're training ballistic movements, the snatch and the jerk, and the clean and jerk. And here's an interesting thing. Not only did they make a 61% increase in improvement in strength and performance, but they were fresher from training session to training session, and they had less injuries, which is one of the key things that I talked about why we would want to focus more on bigger changes in load, is because it allows us to train for longevity. So what does this mean for your results? If your goal is to get in shape, build strength, lose body fat, like whatever that goal is for you, and you're using kettlebells, I don't recommend micro loading. I recommend focusing on the classic sized kettlebells. So for ladies, this would be 8 kilos, 10, 12, 16 kilos. For gentlemen, this would be 16, 20, 24, 28, 32. But I challenge you men particularly to stick to 8 kilo jumps. 16, 24, 32. See what happens when you avoid those little in-between sizes, the 20, the 28. I guarantee you're gonna be stronger, you're gonna be fresher. You won't come across injuries because you won't be training with weights that you're not quite ready for. So let's say you're doing snatches and you're training with a 24 and you wanna make that jump to the 32. So you start training with a 28, maybe you start getting blisters and whatnot. Well, you probably weren't ready for that yet. So to really go from 24 to 32 kilo snatches, you've got to be really dialing in your snatch technique with a 24. You got to really be building your finger strength with that 24. And then in between your snatch sessions, I'd probably do, well, my camera died and I'm back. As I was saying, I would be building that volume with a 24 kilo, building your skill and your technique with a 24 kilo, building your finger strength, and then using the 32 as maybe one day a week, using that 32 as heavy one arm swings and start building your volume there versus jumping to the 28. So if you want to be able to train for longevity, if you want to be able to attain your goals, strength training with kettlebells, I don't recommend micro loading. Stick to the longer jumps. And not only will you get stronger, but you'll be fresher and you'll get injured less. That's all I got for you today, man. Appreciate you watching. See you on the next one. Peace.